when you preached in chapel? You, yeah. Were you nervous? Yeah. Like, and it happens every time. And some of you who've never been up here and do this don't realize that these teams and speakers they're always nervous. And especially if you graduated from here and you weren't the kind of old, arrogant person that thought he or she should be invited back to speak in chapel. So I was talking to Dr. Randy Carmen, one of our trustees, and we're just shooting the breeze, and Randy lives in Northeast Indiana, and I knew that's where our chapel speaker, Brian Best, lived, and I knew he'd been to the pastorate, and so how's Brian doing, all that. He says, oh, you wouldn't believe the new job that Brian's been doing. And I said, what's that? Well, it's in the stuff that Hannah puts up, but he's the community impact strategist at Ambassador Enterprises. So I called him. I said, well, what is this? What do you do? And 5 or 10 minutes later, we got done with the call. I thought, this could be you. You guys could do this stuff. And so I asked Brian if he'd come out and talk with you about, come on up, talk about God's work in his life. But guys, it's his first time speaking in chapel. Would you make him feel welcome, please? Have fun with the group. See you later.
Okay, let's try that. Whew. So back to Lake Ann, right? Okay, so it was summer of 1994. I graduated the summer of 1994. And I traveled on a ministry team. Do you guys still do ministry teams? Yeah, so we were at Midwest. We were 10 camps in the Midwest. One of them was Lake Ann. It was July the 18th. Ha, I know the day. July the 18th. Tammy Galvin married Brian Bideman. If anyone knows the name Brian Bideman, kind of an iconic legend for soccer for Baptist Bible College at the time. And so Tammy introduced me to a friend of hers who was a Cedarville student. Her name was Tammy. And so next thing you know, it's Wednesday of Lake Ann week, and she calls home and says, I think I met the guy I'm going to marry. That was fast. So that's it. That's how I met my wife. It was 3 days at Lake Ann. So there you go. We love Lake Ann. I have so we've been married now 27 years, 4 daughters. I have I guess I'll call her a senior. She took some gap year education things, and she's at North Greenville University down in Greenville, South Carolina. I have a junior at Liberty University. I have a sophomore at Cedarville University, and I have a senior in high school who is here visiting. So she's doing a multitude of college visits, and it's just incredibly insane. So as Jim said, I did graduate in 1994, or I graduated from here, and it's been a while since I've been back on campus. I have not been in the building, for instance. Dr. Lytle was the dean of men when I was here. He had brown hair. He would probably agree that 90% of the gray, white hair, is it white or gray? We got to go with white, right? White hair came about because of Schaefer Top. Any no Schaefer Top people in the room? Anybody? I mean, what? Oh no. Well, I need to apologize to the grad students then. So, okay, well, Schaefer Top. So Roger Jacobs was my RD and by the way, Dr. Harris was stuffy back then. So I don't know if you guys know Dr. Harris now. You wouldn't even recognize him from the early 90s. He's such an amazing human being, but he was very different back then. So, but man, Coach Davis, My youth pastor in high school called Roger Jacobs, Roger Dodger. They played soccer together, so if you see Roger Jacobs, I'm not saying you need to call him Roger Dodger or anything, but that was what he was called. So I'm telling you, I looked at Roger Jacobs' pictures for the field dedication, and I fear that Schaefer may have done some things to him as well. So I've been thinking a lot what to do with all the memories that I have of and my experiences at Baptist Bible College, the stories I have, and there are too many to tell, and probably there are many that I shouldn't tell, although you guys don't need any ideas, but there are some I probably shouldn't tell. I was told by Paul Golden, however, the statute of limitation has passed. I could say stuff. But I will say this, Dr. Lytle, I do need to make a contribution to the school, and it's for at least 3 years' worth of security deposits I never should have gotten back. So that's the first thing. And then please, I want it to go, I am going to make a contribution to the school, but it has to go to a dorm improvement project, and it can't be Schaefer Top anymore because those grad students, we care about them. But, we also care about the undergrad students. And so it needs to go to a dorm improvement project because I did not do dorm improvement projects when I was on Schaefer Top. It was bad. I'll tell you one. Oh, this is bad. Okay, so I'll tell you one story. So I had this really cool idea. Someone left a plunger in the lounge, which I was like, I wonder if I can throw it against the wall and it'll stick, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like the suction part. It's a reasonably good idea when you're 19, 20, whatever years old. And so I take the plunger, and instead of throwing it like, so it would stay, I threw it kind of like an axe, and I threw it really hard, and it, although it didn't hit the suction end first, it hit the handle end first, right through the wall. So, and I'm like, oh, that's bad. That's bad. So I don't know what to do, so I go up there and I pull the plunger out of the wall and just put it down on the floor like nothing happened. So the RA in that suite was taking a shower, all right? And so he comes out, and he's like, dude, guys, what happened? And of course, like any responsible dorm person, you sit there. You got to be a little more specific. So we didn't know what happened, and so he's like, I heard something, I swear. And so he goes up to the wall, and he's like, he looks at the hole in the wall, and he says, oh, that's not it. That's been there. I'm like, yeah, probably, yeah. Yeah, that's probably been there. So after he takes a shower, I go and look, and the handle of the plunger went into the shower. I mean, if you're taking a shower, sudsing up or whatever, and a handle just kind of goes through, I don't know. So that's one. That's why I don't deserve the security deposits, and we need to make sure those get taken care of. No, I can't do it. So and also, thinking about my time here at Baptist Bible College, and now Clark Summit University, I'll use those, if you hear me say BBC or Baptist Bible College, know what I mean, right? So I see some BBC shirts in here, sweatshirts. I love it, vintage. Yeah, I have one from like a long time ago. So, but here's the thing I want to share besides the goofy stories. This was a place that is filled with a lot of people that have been told that you are wise beyond your years. Maybe since 16 years old, someone has told you that. But you're not really wise beyond your years. You're really a fool. You're really a fool. And it's not that I'm saying a fool like, hey, you're some sort of idiot, but the Bible calls you a fool. You're inexperienced. The Proverbs talks about that. It's the inexperienced, the simple. The simple fool lacks experience, and you lack experience coming to college. And college is part of gaining that experience. And I'll say that a few things impacted me more than a group of people who decided they were going to believe in a fool. And I'll share a couple of those stories about that. So one of the first people that decided he was going to believe in a fool was Mel Walker. Mel Walker. So Mel Walker, he came to my high school in I guess it would have been 1988. And he was a speaker for our junior and senior retreat, recruited me to come to Baptist Bible College. I eventually did come to Baptist Bible College, and Mel Walker believed in me. And he just did. And there are people in the room that Mel Walker believed in, and it shaped their life. And that's what happened to me. For 30 years then after that, Mel Walker and I had a bond that was unbreakable because he chose to believe in me. There were others in the BBC ecosystem. There was Glenn Amos. There was Ken Rudolph. Of course, we talked about Roger Jacobs, Dr. Rockwell. People walk in my office at work, and I have a whiteboard, and my whiteboard is very, very clean and crisp in my writing. And they're like, how did you learn to do that? And my answer was Dr. David Rockwell. I don't know if anyone has ever seen one of, I don't know how you would have seen, but I guess they were whiteboards. I think maybe we used chalk on blackboards. I don't know. But he taught me about that. He says, Brian, in life, details matter. Details matter. So he shaped my life. He believed in me. And then there was Dr. Lytle, who, like I said, he was Dean of Men at the time. A quick story that demonstrates one of the ways he shaped my life. I ended up on the ballot for the student body government. I was the vice president. There was a president. And we were a ticket. And so my friend Jeff asked if I'd run as his VP, and I said sure. And there were several candidates that we had over the course of that time, and we had a debate. And so it's a stage similar to this, maybe a little bit bigger. What do we call that? The cafetorium? Cafetorium? Yeah, auditorium, cafeteria, cafetorium. That's what we do. We name things funny like that. So we had this cafetorium, we're up on the debate, and I am so stinking nervous. I mean, I am just, like I said, I'm a senior in college. I haven't spoken to the whole student body. At that time, the student body was a little bigger than this room, and so I'm just nervous as I can. Oh, it was terrible. And so there was the questions they were going to ask. There was the questions we didn't know they were going to ask, and so I was just a mess. So, but in the back of the room, and when you get over there, there's like this spot. I think maybe there's not blinds, but the accordion thing's pulled. But Dr. Lytle walks in, and he sits in the back. I don't have a stool or anything, so this is going to be weird. Oh, wait, maybe I can use, anyway, I'll try it. So I look back there, and for some reason, God just had me zero in, right on Dr. Lytle. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just, rigid, stiff. And I look at him, and he goes like this. He's sitting down, of course. I'm not sitting down, but I'm like, so he does it again. I'm dense. He does it again. And so and he looks at me and goes, it took about 2 minutes for my body my brain and my body to get in sync. I was calm. And he knew that he could do something to help me. And that's exactly the president that you have, is he's telling me stories of the people up here. And I love that your leader is someone who believes in you, right? And this is a place in which you can find people who will believe in you. I think I started by saying, find you someone who will believe in you. But then I realized I'm really kind of talking to the faculty and staff a little bit there too. Don't ever forget that students are looking for someone to believe in them. Even the 16-year-old who has been told they were wise beyond their years for way too many years of their life. They need you to believe in them in spite of their foolishness. And that's what Dr. Lytle did for me. He believed in me in spite of my foolishness, and somehow I graduated, and somehow I made it into ministry. And for 21 years I was youth pastor, primarily youth pastor at the local church. But something changed in 2015. This is what Dr. Lytle's referring to. Something changed in 2015. So I want to give you a little background for what changed. I think I've got about 15 minutes. We can do this. So in 2015, God called me out of full-time vocational ministry. And since then, I think I've accomplished more ministry than in the 21 years previously combined. Now, that's hyperbole. I get that. No way to truly measure that. I mean, I don't minimize at all the impact that I had on people's lives, young people, their parents, adults. But I had a problem, and the problem came up to this. I wasn't leading for a higher purpose. I wasn't leading for a higher purpose. And so God called me out of ministry, and at the same time then started to train me to lead for and to a higher purpose. So I want to talk about that, my phrase for a second. God called me out of ministry. I believe that if God can call you into something, God can call you out of something. I also believe that he doesn't strip you of your spiritual gifts when he does so. I didn't walk out of the church service after my last Sunday as preaching and suddenly not have the spiritual gifts that I had. And so I just simply took those spiritual gifts and allowed God to start training me to lead to a higher purpose. So how we got there was some stress fractures. I'll admit there was some stress fractures in my life at the time from leadership. It was a hard time. Our church was in decline. And if you've ever led a church in decline, it's hard. If you've been part of a church that's in decline, it's hard. And there are stress fractures that are created in that. And we had been in decline for a couple of years. I came home from an embarrassingly long elders meeting, and I just walked in, and Tammy said, "How'd it go?" Which she's very good at. So she asked me how it went, and of course I was the zombie. I was practically comatose, and I didn't say anything. And so she asked again, "How did it go?" And of course I didn't say anything. And then she says to me, you have to talk. If you're not going to talk to me, you have to talk to somebody. And my answer to her then was, there's nobody. There's nobody. And I thought, wait a minute. This isn't, as soon as I said that, I was like, this isn't what God has for me. Something has to change. And she saw that something had to change too. So she did something she said she would never do. She called her dad. Her father owns a private equity company. It's called Ambassador Enterprises, which as I was walking through, I didn't know this. Surprise to me, but Ambassador Enterprises was one of the sponsors for this building. I didn't even know. Here you go. So Ambassador Enterprises, and she said, "Dad, you've got to do something." So then he did something he said he would never do, which he said, I'm going to offer him a job to work at Ambassador Enterprises. And he had this vision. I'll share with you what this vision was. He had this vision that, because people ask him all the time, he's a strong guy. People ask him all the time, how do you integrate faith in the marketplace? How are you integrating faith in the marketplace? These young Christian leaders are like, how do I integrate faith in the marketplace? You know, and they're looking for a formula. They want to say, hey, these are the three things you do to integrate faith in the marketplace. And that's not my father-in-law at all. He's not like, hey, I'm going to give you a formula. But he wanted to give hope to those who are in the marketplace, that there is integration into the marketplace that's possible. And so he had this vision of how can we demonstrate and show what faith in the marketplace looks like. He also wanted to achieve a vision of community development that was far different than what was happening in our community. And so he had this vision. And so in the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you to make some connections to Nehemiah that relate to this vision that my father-in-law had and that I come alongside as a shared vision. And it's Nehemiah, and the answer, I'm going to ask you a question. What did Nehemiah build? A wall. That's the conventional answer, right? Nehemiah built a wall. But if you look at who built the wall, did Nehemiah build the wall? What's the answer? Anyone read Nehemiah chapter 3? The answer is, Nehemiah's name is in there once. One time. Nehemiah did not build a wall. Nehemiah built a community that built a wall. So if you want to write stuff down, that's one. Nehemiah built a community that built a wall. And the difference between building a wall versus building a community that built a wall is an example of being called to a higher purpose. And that's the vision that I have been living out in my life for the last 8 years. Is how do I build a community that builds a wall? How can I be a part of building a community that builds a wall? And so in Nehemiah chapter 3, and just for time, we're not going to read it all, but it just goes on and on and on. So if you look at Nehemiah chapter 3, you'll look and say, it's Eliashib, he rose up with his brothers, and they built the sheep gate, and they consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to him, Jericho built, and next to them, Zakur built, and it goes on and on and on. There are 32 verses that show who built the wall. And so I asked then, how did Nehemiah build a community that built a wall? And here's the challenge for all of us in this room. And this is what Dr. Lytle was referring to is, hey, this is great to hear. So Nehemiah started with, like I talked about, this higher purpose. So let's go back to chapter 2 and verses 17 and 18 of Nehemiah. There's some interesting things here. It says, then I said, Nehemiah referring he said, I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? Anyone live in a community that's distressed in any way? Anyone? Let me see your hand. Do you live in a community that's distressed in any way? Are there buildings that are kind of like, not great? If you live in a small rural community in the Midwest, that's like every community. All right, so there's always the building that's no one's using. There's the broken down YMCA. There's whatever. There's just all kinds of things that are happening. Anyone, let's do this. Anyone ever had a group project and it didn't quite work out? Yeah, okay, now we're talking, right? So my daughter is at Liberty. She's in charge of like multiple group projects, and she just decided I'm just going to be Attila the Hun in these projects. Everyone's just going to do what they're going to do. I'm not going to take any slack from people because group projects are a nightmare, and someone has to take charge, and she's the one who decided to take charge. But group projects can be miserable, and that's what it feels like in small communities across America. It's like a group project. And everyone's like, this is terrible. There's no hope. There's no hope in this. Sometimes your communities they're not just run down from a physical perspective. Maybe they're run down morally. And you see this disintegration of morals. Perhaps you see your community and no one can get along. And there's just an absolute mess. Our community, I don't think the person that I'm going to talk about would ever watch this, but we have a mayor and a city council in one of our communities, and it's like they're children. So one of the councilmen is saying something about, he's voting no for something, and he doesn't like how the mayor's handling something, and the mayor literally says in a council meeting, recorded for all the community to see, oh, Mr. what's his name, are we dealing with your hurt feelings again? These are children. They're acting like children. Your community might have that. You might have that. And so it doesn't take long for us to realize that what Nehemiah said. He said, you see the trouble we're in? Our communities that we live in, that you came from, are in trouble. And he says this, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may longer suffer derision, embarrassment. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. They didn't say, Nehemiah, you go build the wall. Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. It doesn't take too long for those two verses and see those two verses and make a connection to a higher purpose. Nehemiah was interested in the glory of God. The broken down wall was a symptom of something bigger. Let us rise up and build was a solution for something bigger as well. And it wasn't until after leaving vocational ministry that I came face to face with this truth. Self-purpose disguised as ministry or any other noble work just does not work. Self-purpose described as ministry doesn't work. That was my problem, self-purpose versus higher purpose. And I think that you might have a little bit of that too. I think we all have a little bit of the self-purpose versus higher purpose. Tim Keller was speaking at the Gospel Coalition in 2012, and he answered this, he was asked, what does a gospel-shaped life look like? And he said this, in a culture, people have got to have something more important than their own happiness and their own interest. They have to, or else there can't be a cohesive society. Another word for community. There can't be a community. He said, people want their own happiness and fulfillment and are willing to create a fragmented society to get it. And I was a leader in the local church in my community, and I was unknowingly contributing to the fragmentation. How so, you might ask? Well, I'll show you. Let me substitute the word the church for the word people, and I'll read that sentence again. In a culture, the church has to have something more important than its own happiness and its own interest. It has to, or else there can't be a cohesive society. The church wants its own happiness and fulfillment and is willing to create a fragmented society to get it. Oof. What about my personal contribution? Let me put my own name in there. Brian has to have something more important than his own happiness and his own interest. He has to, or else there cannot be a cohesive society. Brian wants his own happiness and fulfillment and is willing to create a fragmented society to get it. What was my happiness and fulfillment that I was willing to create a fragmented society to get? Thinking that I could be or should be important if I built a wall. That was self-purpose. But a higher purpose says this: what if I built a community that built a wall? And now I get it. We're going to talk about performance in a minute. Simon Sinek made an interesting discovery during his work with Navy SEALs. Perhaps you know Simon Sinek. An organization he calls the highest performing organization on the planet. He asked them, how do you pick the ones who get to be the best of the best of the best? He said that SEALs then drew, the SEALs people, the commanders, drew a 4x4 grid on a whiteboard. And in the bottom, you had performance on the one side, and you had trust on the bottom. So you in your mind, get that 4x4 grid. He said, obviously, no one wants the bottom right quadrant, or bottom left in my mind, but that bottom quadrant where it's low performance and low trust. No one wants that person. That person gets vetted out really quickly. They're toxic people. But also then he said, but no one wants the high performance, but low trust either. High performance, low trust. No one wants that. And so then he went on to say that everyone wants what's in this upper right corner, and it's the high performance, high trust person. That's how they vet out. They want high performance, high trust. And they even said, look, we'll take lower performance if we get the trust. Trust is the most important thing. In fact, I have a video I want you guys to see of Simon Sinek talking about that very, very thing. So this is in a response to that 4x4 grid.
Navy SEALs are one of the highest performing organizations on the planet. And a former Navy SEAL was asked, who makes it through BUDS? Who makes it through the selection process to become a SEAL? And he said, I can't tell you who gets through, who makes it, but I can tell you the kind of people who don't make it. He said the star college athletes that never have been really tested to the core of their being, none of them make it through. He said the preening leaders who like to delegate everything, none of them make it through. He said the big tough guys that come in with huge muscles, covered in tattoos, and want to prove to everyone how tough they are, none of them make it through. He said some of the guys that make it through are skinny and scrawny. He said some of the guys who make it through, you will see them shivering out of fear. He said, but every single one of them who makes it through, when they're emotionally exhausted, when they're physically exhausted, some way, somehow, they're able to dig down deep inside themselves to find the energy to help the person next to them. Service. Service. Giving to another, having their back, is what makes the highest performing teams in the world. Not their strength and not their intelligence. It's their willingness to be there for each other.
Be there for each other. So it's so interesting. I spent my life, and I'm not trying to denigrate or, listen, go be pastors. Lead your local churches. I'm just saying, lead your local church towards a higher purpose. Don't lead your local church into a self-purpose, because self-purpose doesn't work. And when you're in a performance situation like Simon Sinek talks about, here's the things. How big is your youth group? People, I was part of the Vision for Youth, and everyone would say, like, hey, well, how big's your youth group? And no one wanted to ask the question, but that's the question everyone asks. How big's your youth group? How many kids came to camp? Performance metric. How's the offering? Oh, yeah. Talk about leading a declining church. Yeah, some of you guys are in churches where that's the thing your pastor is thinking about more than anything else is, are we going to pay our staff? And so performance kind of gets messed up. And so when you get this performance messed up, you completely lose sight of the fact that you really need to be trustworthy. The performance will come. The trustworthiness, however, you got to train for. And I was given the gift, the opportunity in 2015 to become more trustworthy in my community. Because I was simply focused on the self-purpose of my church. And I didn't know what the needs of the community were. I didn't know that there was political problems. I didn't know there was downtown development problems. I didn't know there was some moral problems. I didn't know those things because I was so concerned about religious folks. But I couldn't see the community, and so it was just like Nehemiah being told, hey, the walls are all broken down. Are you aware of that? No, wasn't aware. Now I am. So here's what I want to tell you. I got to wrap this up. We are tight on time. This goes so fast. Man. Okay. So I'll tell you a couple things. Here's our theory of change. Here's how we think communities you have to understand, if you're going to be a community builder, there are three things that build community. The first one is moral responsibility. This is where, our churches, the anchors of moral responsibility and community, absolutely. You should lead your churches remarkably well so that they are the anchors of moral responsibility in a community. But there's also relational trust. So you think about moral responsibility, the second piece of that is relational trust. People need to trust you in the community if you're going to be a community builder. Number three is economic prosperity. I'm not sure how much economic prosperity you're going to be able to do here as students at college. So we'll kind of talk quickly through that one. But here's what I want you to understand. I have dozens and dozens and dozens of relationships in the community that I never had and never would have had I not been called to a higher purpose. I'm going to tell you about one of them. One of them is a woman. She ran for mayor in our little town. Our mayor has not, or our town has not had a woman in a mayor role for decades and decades. She, in our community, is very conservative. It's a Republican-leaning community, and so she is a Democrat. And she's also somewhat, I don't think this is true, but she's an atheist. And she's this, and she's that, and people putting all these, and she decides to run for mayor. And the two of us are friends. And so while she's running for mayor, we met on a regular basis. And one time she stops me, she says, Brian, I just got to tell you, I appreciate that you bring God with you into every conversation. And this is the person who everyone thinks is the atheist. And then a couple months later, we meet. She goes, Brian, can we have a conversation about God? Oh, yeah, we can do that. And we did. To this day, she lost the mayor race. She lost friends. She lost a lot of things to run for mayor. But she didn't lose me. Because when the chips were down, I had her back. Because there's relational trust that's built. And I've spent the last 8 years building relational trust in the community. Here's ways I do that. I show up. And you need to show up for your community. And I show up on the library board. I somehow ended up being the president of the library board in Garrett, our little town. I have no idea. Any library people in here? I'm on the library board. That's fun. I'm on the YMCA board of our local community. My favorite, LifeWise Academy, on the board for LifeWise Academy. If you ever want to talk about something that's absolutely amazing, talk to me about LifeWise Academy. Hopefully, I wish I had another time to talk about LifeWise Academy. I won't do it. I don't do those things for self-purpose. I do those things because a higher purpose looks like a mooring line. And I want to explain this very quickly. So a ship gets tied to the shore on these big moors, these big posts. Perhaps you've seen them on a cruise. If you've gone on a cruise or been down to the shore, you'll see these huge, huge pylons. And there's a rope that's tied to that, from the ship to that pylon. You guys got the visual? You know what I'm talking about? Someone give me a little nod. Yes, got it. Mooring lines are what keeps that ship from drifting away. And in our communities, when we don't have people that are driven to build communities as opposed to self-purpose of building wall, build a community that builds a wall, you are the mooring lines of a community, morally, relationally, and economically. You're a responsible, productive student. Everyone says, hey, if you attach yourself to something bigger than you, something stronger than you, we need more of those people to be mooring lines. And so I'm like, yes, I absolutely will serve on the library board. And the reason I want to serve on the library board is because I get to then throw a mooring line from the ship that is the library to moral responsibility, to the Word of God, to my faith, to God Himself, to the authority of all morals. And I get to throw that mooring line. So if the library starts to drift, it's not going to drift past where I say it can drift, because I'm on the board. I showed up. I'm going to be on. I'm running for student or for city council. Why am I? I'm running for city council because of a higher purpose. Throw that line onto the shore and shore that ship up so that this city does not have moral decline. This city does not have relational decline. I'm running on a couple of things. I'll say, hey, here's a few things that you shouldn't do. Let's stop all the criticism, condemnation, and complaining. So what does that look like to you? I'm over time. I'll make this super fast. What does this look like for you, a student at CSU? See a need, meet a need. I think it's been so long that the story of the Underground, your little coffee shop, that was a see a need, meet a need. If you want to know more, ask some questions about how that happened. I think a kid just basically said, we need a coffee shop, and I'll go raise the money to do it. Something like that? Is that close? Yeah, close. See a need, meet a need. Don't criticize, condemn, and complain, because that's the easiest way to lose relational trust. Did you hear that? Don't criticize, condemn, and complain. When it's a rainy day at Clark Summit University, are people happy? No, man, it's just complaints. There's stuff to complain about everywhere. But you see a need, meet a need. Stop criticizing, stop complaining, stop condemning. And if you'll do some of these things, if you'll simply say, hey, I got to focus, I need to be the community builder. Clark Summit University is an amazing place, and it's got a history that's amazing. And you know what's going to make it survive? You know who's going to tie it to the mooring lines? You. Build community today, right where you're at, in your suite, in your dorm, in your room. Build community with your roommate. Be someone that they can, first of all, be morally responsible. Secondly, be relationally trustworthy. And I'm telling you, this is when people say, God, God will build the roots to this thing. Let him do something amazing. You posture yourself like Nehemiah that says, hey, I'm going to build a community that's going to build a wall. Clark Summit University needs people like you who are going to be community builders, who will throw their mooring lines to the shore and make sure this university prospers and thrives. And it'll be so because students like you say, we're community builders, and we're going to build community right where we're at. In my dorm room, on my worship team, in whatever perspective you have. Does that make sense? Because if you don't train yourself to be a community builder and have a higher purpose now, here's what you're going to fall into. You're going to fall into training yourself to self-purpose. And I don't want that for any of you. So, time is over. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I love it. I love students. I've loved students. I'm actually one of those people who loves middle schoolers. I think they're awesome. I'm not sure who in the room thinks that's crazy, but I think they're awesome. So, be community builders. Serve a higher purpose. And if you have anything you want to talk to me about, I'd be glad to. I am going to go to Dr. Lytle's principles class, which is happening in, oh man. Look at, you have this thing. What you need to do is make it flash red. Like, can you make it flash red from back there? I don't know. Put it up there. We're late, everybody. So do you want me just to shut it down? Okay. Let's pray. God, thank you for our time. God, it's just amazing to me that you redeem foolish people, and you are the one who set the example of believing in us. And so, God, I pray that you would help these students to know that they're believed in by you, that I pray that even today some faculty and staff member would just reach out and start believing in one of these students. I pray that these students will build community and be called to a higher purpose. There's so many more things that, God, you had for me to say that I prepared to say that just didn't happen, and that's okay. And so, God, just bless this time. Bless these people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.